the kitchen of intrigue, Kurt Jackson and Chris Callowell are cooking up a batch of mystery soup.
Each episode serves a new blend of tips, tactics, trends, and tales from the business and design sides of the escape room world.
So grab your spoon, because this episode starts in 3, 2, 1.
Mystery Soup.
Welcome to Mystery Soup Podcast. I'm Kurt, and with me is Chris Callowell, my co-host. How are you doing, Chris?
Good. I mean, we're talking about escape rooms, so I'm always good when we talk about escape rooms.
Right?
Like, let's just you know what? Let's just stop the podcast and let's go do one. Let's just forget it and go to a room instead.
Chris and I, we have another podcast in the summer camp industry. So we talk about summer camp programming, and we just before this, we recorded our fifth or fourth podcast because we made the announcement that we are stopping that podcast after
since 2018. So however long that's been.
Oh my goodness, it's been longer than I remembered. And so we're bringing that to a close, and we are doing this one. But I have completely transitioned out of summer camp and into escape rooms, and Chris is very busy with other things. So for this episode, we have got a guest who I've gotten to know over the past couple of weeks, looking into his games, and I played his games that are out there right now. And he is another Chris. This is going to be a little odd. When I say, hey, Chris,
it's going to be tricky.
It's going to be tricky. So Chris Moschella is the designer of a couple of incredible games. And I call one Moonshine Hootenanny because I can never remember the whole name. I know you're going to give it to us.
Oh, come on.
Kurt, it's easy. I don't understand. Well, guys, it's easy. I don't understand why this is so difficult. You're being a little dramatic here. It's Big Ma Bertha's Fussin and a Feudin, Moonshine and Hootenanny. It's a nice short title, rolls right off the tongue.
Right off the tongue.
Right off the tongue.
Just like your other game, which you refer to as Odd Pie.
It's Professor Bleehall's Odditorium, Emporium, and Pie Shop.
Yes, yes. And we will talk about your names.
What's interesting is I was just down in Gatlinburg, and we did the Hootenanny. And it was funny because when I asked to do it, I'm like, oh, which room do you want? I'm like, oh, we want to do the Hootenanny. And the lady, like, you don't have any other games there called the Hootenanny or anything. That's the only one that has the word in it. She goes, oh, do you mean? And she said the whole thing. I go, yes, that's the one I mean.
Oh, that makes me happy, because one of the things that I've come into a lot with some venues over the years is they don't understand the importance of that. And I know we're going to talk about that later, so I don't want to get into it too much, but nomenclature matters. Using the proper names matters. It's a branding thing. It's an integrity thing. That makes me happy to hear that they're doing that, because it's so much easier to just say Bertha, right? Like for a venue that isn't emotionally invested, they didn't create it. It's not their proverbial kids, so to speak. It's so much easier to just say, oh, do you mean Bertha? Or do you mean Odd Pie? I love that. In fact, if you go on their Bookio, to book a game, it has the whole thing spelled out.
Oh yeah.
That's a shame.
I typed it in the system back in 2017 when it opened. I said, can we put the full name? And they're like, you're going to have to type it. No problem. Typed it up. It still says it.
You have a new game that's coming out. We're going to touch on that as well. And that's how I reached out to you, Chris, and wanted to look at that game and find out more about it. And so that's how we got connected. What I want to do, I guess, right now is have you kind of just give us an introduction of who you are, what you do, so that people who aren't familiar with these games, they get a sense of who you are.
Yeah, for sure. So my name's Chris, as we talked about. Branding wise, I use Chris Plus as my design sort of phase. Ever since I was a kid, I've been a theme park geek. And that's a term that I use with endearment. I don't have any issue describing myself as a nerd, because I am in that genre. Escape games kind of organically became an evolution of that for me, almost something that I fell into. Another big passion of mine has always been Halloween season, haunted houses, all that sort of thing. So I try to kind of bake that into my theme park travel to see Halloween events and different attractions every September and October. One trip that I do every single year is Southern California. Big fan of Knott's Scary Farm, Universal's Halloween Horror Nights, all of those different things. Well, one year, 2013. And again, we do this trip every year, and I have friends and family out there. So, I'm the one who travels. They're the ones who are all locals there. We came across this immersive theater thing in 2013, and it was really cool. It really blew us away. And so the following year, which would be 2014, I found myself saying, gosh, I guess I didn't mention, that was the third year of that immersive theater thing. We found it in its third year, and we're out there every single season.
Oh,
So, the following year, 2014, I kind of said, I wonder if there's other things out there like this. If we missed that, what else might we be missing? So I did a whole bunch of digging. Well, 2014 is around when escape games started popping up in the US. So none of us really had ever heard of them because it really wasn't a thing, at least in the US. A couple of
Right.
years prior overseas, but not so much in the US. So there were a few in the LA area that I came upon, and I looked at them and I said, I don't know if this is for us because none of us were video game people. None of us were really puzzle people. We were immersive people. We were attraction people. We were themed entertainment people. But I don't know, this whole solving puzzles thing, maybe we're not smart enough, all those doubts that everybody just sort of
Sure.
intrinsically
Yep.
has, right? But they were spooky themed, as frankly, a lot of early escape games were, right? So they were spooky themed. So I called a couple of friends that we would normally do haunts and the sort with out there. And I said, guys, I don't know if this is for us. I don't know if we're going to like this, but worst case scenario, it seems like it has a haunt aspect to it. So maybe that's enough to kind of draw us in. So the first one that we did officially was Panic Room in Hollywood. It was an insane asylum theme. You know what? It was fine, right? It wasn't going to make a new fan of the
Didn't
genre.
blow your mind.
No,
Yeah.
it wasn't. Yeah, it wasn't one of those like, oh my gosh, I need to see more of this.
Right.
But it also, importantly, wasn't one of those that was so bad I never want to do this again. Right.
Mhm.
Now that day we actually booked 3 back to back because we didn't have any idea what we were going to think of them or anything like that. So the first one was Panic Room. I remember pulling up and we looked at each other and said, if there's ever a scenario where we're going to have our organs harvested, this is it. Right? Because it was it was a seedy looking building from the outside. There were no other cars there. I think maybe they had 2 games at the time. This is way back when. And again, nobody knew what escape games were. So they didn't have business yet. Right. So it was very like, we don't know what we're getting into, but let's go see. And it's fine. The second one we did, same afternoon, evening, was themed to the movie The Purge. It was an official licensed promotional tour thing for insert whatever Purge sequel came out in 2014.
Cool.
Yeah.
Again, it was fun.
Purge 17.
Purge 17, somewhere around there. Yeah.
There's a few of them.
I think there was 3 of them that year, in fact. So you'd have to check your notes. What was interesting about it is it was in an, again, to paint the, like, what are we walking into? This feels so seedy. It was 2 18-wheeler trailers side by side, like big rigs. And like you went up steps into a door that they cut into the side of one of them. You basically walked the length of one trailer and then you turned and then walked the length of the other trailer. But what was weird is it was pretty well themed inside. Scenically, it was kind of compelling. It wasn't terrible. Puzzle wise, it was trash. And operationally, it was even worse. They basically had it rigged so that you would lose. Like we got to a certain point and we would find out later that the reason we couldn't solve the last puzzle is because they deemed that we shouldn't win for whatever reason. So even though we had ample time to win, this is going to sound like a joke. They hid some of the things in their pockets. There was an actor and they pocketed stuff so that we couldn't get it, so that we couldn't solve it. So that left a pretty bitter taste because we knew what we were supposed to be doing. It physically wasn't in front of us.
Mm-hmm.
So, we went from fine to kind of infuriating. And then the third one that we did, this is very interesting to me. It was only open for about a week. I don't even know I think they were just out of beta testing. It's called The Basement. Now, I say that because today, all these years later, The Basement is one of the sort of most respected escape game venues in the country. Their level of detail and craftsmanship and creativity of puzzles and outside the box thinking, even all these years later, they're kind of a benchmark for, when it's a measuring stick against all other games that you play. Not necessarily my favorite game anymore, right? But still up there. But we walked into the lobby and it was like one of those, it reaffirms your opinion of, oh man, this is going to be bad, because the lobby was not very welcoming or comfortable at the time. He's since greatly remodeled it. There's just nothing to indicate that it's going to be a world-class attraction. And then you go inside and it's like, oh, this is actually kind of cool. And then it just got better. So when we came out, it was instantly, are there more of these? Are there some of these, I live in Orlando. Are there some of these back in Florida? Are these just an LA thing? And it became the research. Interestingly enough, even though technically the Panic Room one was technically my first traditional escape game, I would later in hindsight realize I'd played what I would qualify as an escape game a couple of years prior. Five Wits, if you're familiar with them. What's fun about those guys is that they don't market themselves as escape games, which drives me crazy. I'm friendly with their one of their marketing people. They're all great folks in that company. Very sort of homegrown, very nice, passionate, experienced, creative people. I said to him one day, guys, you have the ability to legitimately claim that you invented the genre of escape games. All you have to do is call yourself an escape game, and you are the world's first, because nothing else, even overseas in Europe and Asia, when they were operating, nothing else existed like that at the time. But they didn't want to, because they wanted to stand on their own. They didn't want to be compared to other things. On the one hand, it's kind of smart, right? They wanted to be their own attraction. They didn't want to be compared. They didn't want to have that stigma of the proverbial locked in a room and, oh, it's going to be scary and all of that. Five Wits' whole brand is family friendly. So they wanted to avoid that stigma. And the way to avoid that is to avoid those words. So I would say that was my first, but from a technical perspective, it wasn't. It would be that Panic Room. In hindsight now, you look back and you're like, wow, it's remarkable that I stayed hooked on this industry, because a lot of the early games that I played, especially outside of Southern California, they were not good. Like, they were just objectively bad. Right. But you didn't have that level of comparison, right? You didn't see phenomenal stuff, really. I mean, the basement was the outlier, but everything else was not so great. So you didn't have that comparison.
Yeah.
Right.
Fair enough.
I, for several years, one of my theme park industry design colleagues would say to me, you should be the escape room guy. You should be the guy that designs escape rooms. In fact, his words were, every industry has a, quote, the guy, and escape games are so new. No one's staked claim to that title. Right. So you should do that. And my response was always, I'm not going to do that. I'm not smart enough for that. I'm not smart enough to write all these puzzles. It's just not, my brain just doesn't work that way. I'm not going to do that. Right. I'll write the stories. I'll come up with the worlds, the characters, the settings, all of that stuff. Love that idea. Partner with any venue to do that, but I'm not going to write the games. And the more that I played over time, just as sort of as human nature, well, it wasn't even so much that. I mean, I liked them, obviously. I mean, I kept playing them. I think at that point I'd played about 100 of them. So I certainly liked them, but the more that I played, as is human nature, I started having this sort of unwritten list of woulda, coulda, shouldas, right? Oh, I would have done this, or they could have done that, or man, they should have done this with it. That would have been so cool if they did that. And one day I just sort of had this like light bulb over my head type epiphany, where if I put pen to paper of all those woulda, coulda, shouldas, even though they would be all disjointed because they were all different games and different themes, in just those woulda, coulda, shouldas that I came up with, the venue had nothing to do with, I would have written multiple games already. So at that point, I just said, maybe we do this. Maybe I design escape games. And it just sort of jumped from there.
Yeah.
So you talked about some amusement parks. I take it you're a big amusement park super fan.
Yeah.
So what are I love amusement parks. What's your favorite place? What's your favorite rides?
Well, when you start talking about themed entertainment, right? Disney's going to dominate the conversation.
Yeah.
it is what it is, right? And there's nothing to apologize for there. I don't think any theme park in the world is ever going to claim the title of best theme park from the original Disneyland in Southern California. Place is, it's the textbook definition of how to design a theme park, right? It has defined worlds and attractions that fit within them. There's things for every member of the family to do. There's thrill rides. There's things for kids. There's things that people can do together that have no height requirements. Stuff like that. I've gotten very sensitive to with my nieces because, I don't have any kids, and you don't think about height requirements until you're taking kids to theme parks. And, I'm a big fan of being the cool uncle, right? So I love taking them to Disneyland or any parks, really. Disneyland has so many things that have no height requirements that we can all do them together and we all get value out of it. So I think that's just the definition. It's so bizarre because it's also really among the first in terms of like a real, genuine, pure theme park. It's not the first amusement park, not even close. But in terms of a theme park, kind of invented the genre, and yet it's still the best that there is. In terms of visually impressive, Tokyo Disney Sea, hands down.
Really?
Oh my gosh. That place, I describe it as offensive, and not for the reason you would normally use the word offensive. It's offensive because how can anything be this good? Right? It's just so real. It doesn't feel like a theme park. You walk around, I literally repeat that in my mind. I've been there a few times now. I find myself constantly aware of, I'm looking around and just saying to myself, how is this a theme? This feels like a real place. That is a real volcano. These are real city buildings. This is not facades and fake. I mean, it obviously is, right?
No.
But just the attention to detail is just absolutely.
Even their animatronics are so far better than anything we have here.
Well, I mean, that's not entirely true, right? Like newer attractions now have those A1000 animatronics that are like human beings with robot insides, right? I mean, their motion is great. The difference is that the Tokyo Disney parks they're not owned by Disney. They're owned by the Oriental Land Company. And OLC understands the philosophy of spend money to make money. So they will open their purse strings and they will spend insane amounts of money. The best example I can give you, if you go to Disneyland in California or Magic Kingdom in Florida, there's a Winnie the Pooh dark ride. And in both cases, neither one of them are very good. One, California's, I would say, is worse, but neither one of them are very good. In Japan, whenever someone asks me, what are the must-see attractions? Pooh's Honey Hunt is always one of the very first things I say, which sounds like a joke. It sounds like I'm trying to steer them, go see something bad despite using children.
Yeah.
Their Pooh attraction, put it in context of inflation, right? It opened in 2000, I believe. And at the time, it was $100 million dark ride. So that's like Tower of Terror, Splash Mountain, Indiana Jones when they opened, back in the 90s. $100 million is in that ballpark.
Wow.
That's the level of quality that they put into it. Not because they have to, but because they actually, care to do something over the top. So that place will always be just one of the most remarkable in the entire world to me. It's just I just have such a strong emotional connection to it. It almost seems like this white whale that you never get to because it's so far away. It's so expensive to go there, right? But yet somehow I've been there a few times and hoping to go again in the near future. It is attainable, In terms of non-Disney, there's two that really stand out for me. Both of them are in Europe. One is called Phantasialand in Germany. It's near Cologne. And one is called Efteling in the Netherlands. Phantasialand is kind of that roller coaster tycoon park. You build when you play roller coaster tycoon, if you did that when you were younger, you have the ability to do anything you want in terms of theming and scenic and mountains and valleys and canyons and all of these crazy things, right? And you build without any repercussion because money's no object. It's just a silly game to pass the time. But in the back of your mind, even though this is awesome, it's not realistic. No one's ever going to build a park like this. And then they did, and they named it Phantasialand. It's such a small footprint. So what they did to maximize the space is they build on top of things and cross over things, but every section is like themed to the nines in ways that, you know, would give Disney a run for their money. And then with Efteling, that's just the quintessential fairy tale. It's kind of like if you took Fantasyland from Disneyland and exploded it into a gigantic theme park that was all Fantasyland, but maybe even had more attention to detail. And then you add in the fact that the whole place is really genuinely set in a forest. It is a European forest, so that it already has that feel of fairy tales because most of them are based in Europe. Just spectacular. Cool. Absolutely spectacular. Tangible magic in the air.
Yeah.
You know, I've described, between the two of them, I've described Fantasyland as the closest non-Disney theme park to Tokyo Disney Sea in terms of that wow of the realism of it. And then Efteling is the closest non-Disney park to Disneyland. So that's pretty high praise coming from me.
Tell us about the Escape Authority website, because that's yours, right?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I launched that site in 2016. It was born from my perspective, from the need for a site that could speak to the quality of escape game industry, but from the eyes of an experienced traveler who's really seen the best of the best out there.
Sure.
And also understands the design piece of it. You know, before Escape Authority, there were not very many options. Again, you know, we launched in 2016. Escape games became a thing in 2014. So there really wasn't a lot of time for anything to build up before that. There was a very small handful, 1 or 2 or 3.
Yeah.
So I had no interest in reviewing. Little secret about me, although I am a strong writer, if you've read any of the EA content, I don't enjoy writing. It's homework for me. It's a chore. It's book reports. I don't like doing it. I can be good at something and still kind of hate it.
Sure.
And so that was always the thing for me behind the scenes. So I never considered doing any sort of reviewing or anything like that, even though there was always part of me that said, gosh, you've seen more than an average person. You could be helpful to people, you know? So I was on this trip with some colleagues to see some immersive theater type stuff, interactive game-based stuff. It was research for a prospective client that we had that was looking into doing a park in Asia, in Indonesia, in fact. And ultimately that park didn't end up happening, but it was serious enough that there was a lot of design discussion for, you know, the better part of 9 months or a year. So part of that was doing this research trip. So we went up to New York. They were based in LA, the other colleagues. So we kind of viewed it as New York and LA are probably the places to see the best of the best. So I reached out to another review website and said, we're going to be up this way. What are some of the absolute just showstopper, best of the best escape games up there? We want to see the very best there is. Luckily, I'm a planner by nature. I've traveled all over the world. I tend to travel solo, so I do all the planning myself. So I did a lot of planning for this. And so I took a percentage of the recommendations that came, but then also a percentage of my own, you know, research and vetting and paired them together. And thank goodness I did, because I don't say this to be snarky. It's just being honest. The things that came to us highly recommended, we did about 50 games on that trip. It was a 3-week trip, both coasts. The things that came highly recommended, the 5 or 6 of them, they would have been like 45 to 50 if we ranked the games. They were the worst. The one in particular that really stands out to me, that is sort of like the Batman villain origin story of EA. This one game, the exact phrasing was something to the effect of, quote, the most beautiful escape game scenic you'll ever see in your entire life. Jaw-dropping, inspiring, stunning. It was a spaceship theme. So now already your mind is kind of framing together what that spaceship might look like, right? And it's probably, maybe it's a little Star Trek, maybe it's a little Star Wars, maybe it's more sci-fi, Jules Verne, right? Yeah, no, what if I told you it was 4 plaster white walls and a drop panel off the ceiling and not much else? That's the spaceship. And not only is that the spaceship, right? And not only is that the spaceship, but that's the spaceship that is the, quote, most beautiful escape game scenic you'll ever see. Now, perhaps this is on me because I forgot to mention in the middle of the room was a Dyson bladeless fan because, you know, the future. And I'm not kidding when I tell you, like, that was it. That was the theming. That was the scenic. Like, you know, we're talking about all of this and we're harping on it because of the shock value of that hype versus execution. The reality is even the puzzles were terrible. They were illogical. They were tedious. It was just a bad experience from start to finish the whole way through, story, scenic, and puzzles. So as soon as we exited that room, I turned to the people I was with, and I was like, there was no secret that I was not happy. I was grumbling through the whole game. I turned to them and I just said, as soon as I get home, we're launching a website. And they said, wait, what? We're launching a website. Like, if this is the advice that people are being given and what they're spending money on, we need to give them a counter voice. And that's what we're going to do. And I got home, and a few weeks later, launched Escape Authority. So that became the thing. Unfortunately, with me, everything has to be like set to maximum. So I'm going to put 110% effort into anything that I do. I can't just kind of phone it in and do the bare minimum. I kind of wanted to just do the bare minimum. I thought, like, well, this will be easy enough. And that's not how it works for me. So what it became was a 7 days a week unpaid job, right? A full-time, more than full-time job, unpaid, because I wouldn't take in any advertising. I felt that that was important to keep it impartial. So there was no profit from that site the whole way through, from day one to the end. There was no profit. So it was all just to share a passion and help the industry and help the guests and help the venues. And I'm glad that I did it. It had a really, really strong 5-year run. I basically stopped regular updates in the end of 2020. We did a sweeping amount of coverage of remote play games just to sort of help the industry during COVID, when I felt like we were in a position to help. So from there, what I ultimately ended up deciding was, we've kind of accomplished everything that I set out to accomplish. We sort of redefined what a standard should be for this industry. We gave it a voice. We gave it a spotlight. We gave it a platform. I'm going to keep the site up. My plan is indefinitely, forever, as kind of an archive, and I still get messages from people every now and then about they just found the site and it was so helpful to them picking a new game. Even all these years later, I still get messages from venue owners saying these customers came in and they heard about us through your site. So my hope is that it remains helpful to people. That's not to say that I won't occasionally review on it, but days of multiple new reviews per week, or even weekly content, I just don't have time.
Yeah.
You touched on this a little bit earlier. How
Sure.
did you actually get into game design then? Like, what brought you to the actual, like, I'm ready to start designing and creating the actual games?
Well, I mentioned the woulda, coulda, shouldas. That was sort of the real big epiphany for me, right? Is the confidence reality that, no, I can do this. I am smart enough for this. This isn't some specially trained thing. Like, I really do have a feel for this, right? My first sort of soiree professionally with an escape game company was just consulting. It was a local company here in Orlando. They're not even in business anymore. But I just walked in one day, and I'm nothing if I'm not confident. And they asked what we thought after the game. And I just told them, your games are good, but I can make them better. Which is not how I would normally present something. There was just something in the air that I kind of felt like that was going to be well received, and it was. So I ended up doing consulting with them, so that consulting thing, I guess, got people to recognize in town who I was. This is before Escape Authority. So I didn't have a reputation. I didn't have a brand. I was just a guy, right? Nobody knew that I was an attraction designer. I was just some guy. Well, that consulting thing apparently got my name out, to the extent that I went to play a game at a different venue and got pulled aside, like pulled away from my group privately, back of house, by the owner of that company, and said, we want you to design a game for us.
So Odd Pie is obviously a different type of escape room, right?
Yeah.
Than what you see out there. How would you describe it?
So first of all, I do not brand or market Odd Pie as an escape room. I don't have any issue with you calling it that, because, it's just easier to, people understand what an escape game is. So fine. But I do not sell it to clients as an escape game. I call a create your own adventure game. So the buzzword description of it is a score-based race against the clock filled with escape game style puzzles. So the keys here are, it's full of puzzles. It's all escape game style interaction throughout, from start to finish. But each puzzle is a standalone island. Nothing connects. There's no chain that links them all together like a regular game. So you can play any puzzle in any order. If there's a puzzle you get that you don't like, guess what? just don't do it. Just skip it. You don't have to do anything. Every puzzle leads to a quote unquote prize. It's not something you take home, but it's something that has a score associated with it for the puzzle that you did. Higher prizes for harder puzzles or for longer puzzles, lower prizes for easier puzzles or for quicker puzzles. There's nothing about the experiences about escaping the room. Nothing about it is a mission based or anything like that. The premise is you've won a shopping spree in a contest you didn't even enter. Now you're going to go and get as much junk as you can possibly collect within an hour or whatever amount of time the venue chooses to operate it at. The interesting thing with Odd Pie is it's create your own adventure for a guest, but it's also create your own adventure for a venue. So you could run Odd Pie as an hour, and pretty much everybody that has it does. You could run it for 45 minutes. You could run it for 15 minutes. You could let someone come in and have one puzzle for free as a sample. If you're trying to hook them to buy a ticket, you have that ability. You have my blessing to do that. That's exactly the intent of the game, is to have that flexibility and scalability to it.
We played it. We played it in Michigan. Didn't even think about that you could skip a puzzle.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense now in retrospect that because we had extra coins, right?
Sure.
But we didn't even think about, okay, this puzzle, let's go ahead and skip it. I guess you want to be a completionist, right? You want to be like, okay, this was given to me. We got to do it.
You know, part of it is when you're an escape game player and you've done other games elsewhere, you get programmed. For better or for worse, you get programmed. And in any other game, that is not acceptable. You cannot leave a puzzle. You will not finish the game if you don't solve the puzzle, because it's going to lead you to the next step and you just will never finish, right? In Odd Pie, not only can you do that, it's encouraged. Everything I do is very story driven. Even Odd Pie, where there's not a narrative based story, there's not a beginning, middle, and end to the story, because it really is just to do what you can, as much as you can, as fast as you can. There are story driven points that are factored into the design. If, for example, you don't like a puzzle, well, guess what? This is a store. This is an oddity shop. That's the setting, right? So every store has a return policy. This one does too. Okay.
That's funny.
So the currency in the game is called an Odditorium. It's a little wooden nickel with a graphic design on it that's themed to the game. So each puzzle costs 3 Odditorium to buy. You have to earn the money throughout the game to spend the money in the game. You're not actually taking out your credit card, right? It's all fake money, but you have to spend 3 Odditorium to buy a puzzle. Well, if you really hate a puzzle, don't worry, we got a return policy. You can return it, but there's a restocking fee. So you get 2 Odditorium back and you just don't get to do that puzzle anymore. So you lose 1 coin. But the beauty of it is, again, it's a create your own adventure for every party involved, right? So although that's the way it's written, and although those are the rules, they're not enforced, and they're encouraged to be not enforced. Always read your audience. If the guests seem like they're going to be really disappointed, if they're kids or something and they're just having fun and it seems like it's going to hurt their feelings to lose a coin, just give them the coins back for free. Who cares? There's no prize, right? I think it gets lost in this industry. Escape games are part of the hospitality industry.
Right.
Right. So our role as designers, as operators, as venue owners is to give the guests what they want.
So Michigan and then New York are the two. It was in California, right? No longer in California?
There was initially one in California, no longer in California. The current 2 are in Michigan and in New York. I'll tell you that I've had several meetings about Odd Pie over the past week or 2. You never know.
I'm on Indianapolis.
Well, I don't have any meetings in I don't have any.
Cincinnati.
I haven't talked to any clients in Indiana or Cincinnati, unfortunately. So I can tell you, while I can't tell you where those locations are, I can tell you it's not those places. Unfortunately.
I will say though that it's a very fun game. When we left, you get like this little ticket and they punch all the puzzles that you've done, so that when you do come back, you're like, okay, these are the ones that we can go through. And if I lived near Novi, I would definitely go back and play the rest, because the set, and I know that Chris, you basically designed the set with the company. you go out there and do it. But it is such an odd collection of different things. And you look around and you think, any of this can become a puzzle. We're not sure what is going to be a puzzle because there's all these boxes and we don't know what we're going to open up. But it's kind of it's like a mystery. Like when I remember going to the county fair and you pay $1 to get a little bag, but you don't know what's in it.
Sure.
And so you're like, yes, here's your $1. I will take this bag. And then you look at it, and sometimes it's like something that's just weird, and sometimes it's crap. But how exciting! And you look, and you're like, "Here's another $1." Another. That's kind of what I felt like with Odd Buy. I was like, "What are we going to get this time? How fun!"
Well, so what's fun to that? We didn't really mention, but when you have to buy a puzzle with that sort of in-game fake currency, it is sight unseen by design. You give. So there's a host character. His name is Hubert. He's a plant. He's kind of a jerk. And so you tell the plant what number you want to buy. It's kind of like what's behind door number 1. You don't know. You open the door and that's when you find out what you get, right? So everything you're buying is blind. Now, again, read the room, right? So if a guest just really seems like they're going to have a lot of fun with the pie puzzle or the shrunken head puzzle or whatever it is, right? Give it to them. Who cares? It doesn't matter. Make them happy. Right. But by its nature, it is that county fair mystery grab bag. You definitely, you don't know what you're going to get.
And I'm a sucker for those. So
sure.
Yeah.
So we were just down in Gatlinburg with a group of camp directors, and we did and let's see if I can get it all. Big Ma, Bertha's, Fussin, Feudin, Moonshine,
so
Hill, Hootenanny.
Come on, help him out.
It's Fussin and a Feudin.
And
obvious.
All right.
Chris, come on, obviously.
And that's such a perfect theme for that area. Like it fits that area, but it's just a fun room and a fun game. What is your favorite part of that one?
So that game opened in 2017. That game has always had a really special place in my heart. That character, Bertha, that world. There's just something about it that I've always been just in love with that I knew was different and special. But I can say in honesty, there's nothing I would change. I would maybe make it a little bigger. It's kind of a surprise. I reached out to the venue and said, what's the square footage? Because I don't remember. It was that long ago. 337 square feet.
Oh, wow.
Tiny.
Especially with 8 adults. It's tight.
Yeah. Well, it was designed for 6, but that's a whole other conversation. That really has nothing to do with me. Read between the lines, right? But yeah, I would maybe make the rooms a little bigger so that it's more breathable. But other than that, I wouldn't change the flow. I wouldn't change the puzzles. The world is so rich. The characters are so rich. They're so absurd, right? They're so distinct. You're only going to find them there. I don't know if you remember this or know this, but you, the players, are Pa's cousins. You're his 9th cousins, 13 times removed. Which, by the way, everything I do has some silly little Easter egg that no guest is ever going to know. My dog's birthday is September 13th. So that's why you're the 9th cousins 13 times removed. It's a tribute to Monty, my dog.
That's funny.
Right. But you become part of the story. You live in the big city. You're wearing city folk disguises. You got shoes. Your toes aren't sticking out of them. Bertha's never going to think you're with Pa. So that's how you're going to get in. I was so committed to that world that I had already planned for a sequel before it opened. And in fact, even in the current game dating back to 2017, when you win, there is an Easter egg in the post-show spiel that teases the sequel. Pa talks about being rich, and he's going to make enough money to reinvest in some tinfoil hats to stop a pretty big conspiracy going on, but more on this next time. So there is a sequel game for it. It's actually been sold to that same client. We'll see when it gets built. They go at their own speed over there.
Yeah.
They built phenomenal quality. So I guess to a degree, going at your own speed is worth it, but it's a little slower. The game centers around Small Paw Samson. So he's the other side of the story. Even though you kind of worked heavily with him, Bertha's game really is more Paw's game, right? But you're in Bertha's shack. Well, his game is the sequel story of what happens after. So you recall, he ran over Claudette the possum with his tractor one night. He was sampling their goods. Reed, he was drunk off his own moonshine. He was drunk driving the tractor through their field, ran over the possum, killed the possum. Ma will never forgive him. By the way, I learned, I know all these backstories of these characters that never play into the games. I just learned the other day, and that I wrote down the other day, that Claudette was 5 years old when she was run over. And if you Google, this is how much goes into this, man. If you Google the average lifespan of a possum, it's 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
2 to 4 years. So this forever war is over an animal that was 1 year on its maximum life expectancy, right? That's how stupid this is, right? So Pa is now, he's been kicked out. He ran over the possum. Ma's never going to forget. He's kicked out. He goes wandering into the woods, as one does. He stumbles across a crashed UFO, as one does. And he moves into it, as one does. He doesn't know a lot about UFOs, but he does know about, barn life. So he turns the UFO into a barn. So Pa's focus is to try and figure out how to capture, or not capture, but harness the alien technology, because he wants to learn how to time travel. Pa's going to go back in time. He's going to fix this whole mess. He's going to never have run over that possum. He's going to get back together with Ma. Everybody's going to be happy. You, the cousins, need to help Pa do his chores so that he can focus on that big fancy learning. So you're in there in this spaceship. You go into what you think is a spaceship game. I'm a fan of everything you know is wrong, right? So you go in with this preconceived notion of what a spaceship game is going to be. It's going to be cliche, shiny, flashy buttons, all these different things. And then it's a spaceship, but it's got reclaimed barn boards all over the walls and everything. And the puzzles are literally milking a cow, making pigs oink by pulling their tails, feeding a chicken. This is in your spaceship, right? Here's the thing. If you thought that the original Bertha game was straight up slapstick stupid, I can promise. Well, this here's your small poor Benson, and I'm here to tell you why I reckon you city folk ain't seen nothing yet. I reckon. I also voiced the characters, if that wasn't
okay. That is so funny.
I think it's one of the funniest things I've ever written. It's so absurd and so out there. I cannot wait for guests to see it. So excited.
Okay. Well, I will say your games are so unique that if Odd Pie were in 10 different states, right, you would know, okay, if you went to them, and also they're going to keep your name, right? So if you go to them, you're going to say, I've played this game. Yet when we were traveling, we'd go to a speakeasy, we play a speakeasy game and say, that was a pretty good game. Then we'd see another speakeasy and we'd be like, I wonder if that's the same game, because we know that the game we played was sold, like that was bought from a company.
Right.
Is this? And so it has a different name. So you call them up and you say, did you get this from so-and-so company? And they say, yes. You go, I'm glad I called because I've already played your game. There may be a couple of little tweaks and stuff, but overall, I know the game. I like it, but I don't want to play it again.
See, the problem with that, though, is you're also assuming that the person who answers the phone knows where that game came from.
True. That's
right.
True.
Because a lot of people that answer the phone, great people, great customer service, but they don't have anything to do with the buying or the design of a game. They're just the operator, right? They're the ride operator in the theme park. So they may not know that. But that is really frustrating. And that's a big part of the reason why I've got language in my contracts that you can't change the name of a game.
Right.
At first glance, some might look at that and say, oh, you're being controlling. Like, no, what I'm doing is I'm protecting both the guest, but also the venue. Because if the guest plays something they've already seen, they're going to be ticked. And if they're really ticked, they may ask for a refund.
Or leave a bad review.
Or leave a negative review is probably much more likely, because a lot of people are kind of passive aggressive like that.
Sure. So how do you balance the humor with the puzzle solving aspect, to ensure that the game remains engaging and challenging? Because your games have a lot of humor in them. And that is such a plus with your games.
So I mentioned Bertha was written in 2016. It opened in 2017.
Yeah.
Everything at that time was this high stakes life or death urgency. Solve this or you'll die, or you'll blow up, or the world will end, or this will happen, or that will happen, or blah, 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 right? And that stuff works. There's no question it works. That's why it's so overdone, because it works. But it doesn't mean it's the only thing that works. So what I wanted was to do something different. And you'll notice a theme when we're talking about my games. I'm obsessed with different. I don't want to do something that I've seen. I don't want to do something that you could find elsewhere or that you might feel like, oh, this was like that. My stuff is all its own weird, warped, broken unicorns, right? In terms of balancing the humor, the reality is it's just me being me. Bertha is the purest form. Bertha and now Odd Pie are the purest form of that unrestrained me being myself. So, it's just sort of, you do what you find funny, but you also make sure that it never steals the focus from the story you're trying to tell. Don't lose sight of who your star is. Don't lose sight of what your climax is in the narrative, and pepper those things in to enforce it. Or sometimes be comic relief, right? Because sometimes you need some comic relief in there.
So can you walk us through a little bit of the process of designing an escape game, like from that initial concept all the way to the final product? What does that look like, your process?
So I've been in the attraction design world of the theme park side of things for going on 20 years now this May. I've always said from the start when I got into escape games, I do not design escape games. I design attractions. They just happen to have interactive game-based puzzles in them. But they are attractions first and foremost. So the puzzles are something that enhances something that's already cool. It furthers the story and makes it more compelling for the guests. When you think about a dark ride or a show in a theme park, right? Everything always starts with a story. It's no different from an escape game. You establish the world, you define who the characters are, and that makes it tangible and that makes it believable, and it allows guests to get immersed into it. To me, there are 3 questions that when I was wearing the Escape Authority hat, I would judge a game based on. When I'm wearing the Chris Plus hat, I would design a game based on. It's always the same 3 questions. Why does the world exist? Because it has to have been there before you arrived. You take Bertha, her shack in the woods was there long before you city folk came stumbling in. It made Moonshine. She had this relationship with Paw. There's all this backstory. That place was already there. That's question number 1. Question number 2, why are we in this world? There has to be a reason why you're there. And in almost all cases, it can't be because you're playing an escape game. Odd Pie is an exception because it's a shopping spree. It's a contest. So it's a little closer, right? But in Bertha's case, you're the cousins and you're there to help Pa sabotage because she stole his moonshine wrist. Right? So you have to establish why the guests are part of the story. And then most importantly, why is there urgency in the story? Think about this. Every game explains you have just 60 minutes to ... And in my opinion, that is just such complete nonsense, right? Why do I have just 60 minutes? There needs to be a reason. You need to justify it to me. Think about, you have a cold case murder theme for a game, right? And this criminal's been on the loose for decades, right? Gotten away with it. Sherlock Holmes can't solve the case, right? Jack the Ripper, whatever it may be, can't figure it out. You have just 60 minutes to solve this cold case. Well, hold on a second. This case has gone cold for 3 decades. If I solve it in 60 minutes or 63 minutes, guess what I am? A freaking hero because I did what nobody else could do. So those things are so critical to design. And then again, you do it just like an attraction. You start with the story world. You get your start, your middle, your end. You do all of that before puzzles. In a theme park, when you're designing a ride, you have that story and that setting before you think about any of the special effects. The effects are the things that enhance that story to make it real to the people who are on the ride or in the audience of the show or whatever it may be. In my world, the puzzles are the special effects. They bring the story to life. They add that character. They add that flair. That's, it's different, but the same.
I like that. I want to touch on your names real quick. So your names are ridiculous. Down at Doldrix, they've got their names, right? I even had to look that up because I was like, oh, Spoopy Bones. Everybody knows Spoopy Bones, right? You're like, but it's Captain
and the
Spoopy
search
Bones
for some other pirate's treasure,
and the Magnificent Quest for some other pirate's treasure. Yeah. And then Crazy Train, the Ballad of Scheme and Plots. So these names, even though you can't remember the whole thing, they spark interest. So obviously this is very measured thing that you do.
Yes.
And how do you come up with the names, and why are you doing these creative, funny names?
The name is the first impression that a guest has of your attraction, of your product. And it has to be memorable and it has to stand out. What sounds more interesting to you? You're going into a venue. You are someone, you are not Kurt, right? You are just an average, regular family that has played 3 other escape games. So you've done a whole lot, right, in your mind. You walk into a venue and you've got 2 options to pick from blind. Both of them are available. Both of them start right now. Both of them are empty. One of them is called Jailbreak. One of them is called Big Ma Bertha's Fussin and a Feudin Moonshine Hootenanny. In terms of how I come up with the words for it, it's probably equal parts sense of humor and thesaurus.
That's so funny because we were talking about that earlier. Chris and I were like, thesaurus is one of those things we use constantly.
I think it's such a lost art in this current world, but anytime I'm writing anything, one of the open tabs is always thesaurus.com.
Yeah, yep. That's so funny.
So how do you make sure your games get that broad audience, those new people, the enthusiasts, the families? Like, is there a way that you found that seems to really work to really attract everyone?
It's honestly pretty simple, and it goes back to my experience doing theme park design. A colleague that I've got a lot of respect for said to me one time many years ago, you never design an attraction for what you think will impress the guests. That's pandering. You design for what will impress you. You have seen much more than them. It's way harder to impress you. So if it's going to impress you, it's going to impress them.
What do you think makes a puzzle either satisfying or unsatisfying for players?
Again, it starts with that cheap answer. It's the wow factor, right? Those corporate buzzwords, right? But that is the truth.
Yeah.
It's the unexpected. It's the surprise. You didn't see it coming. You may have done this particular puzzle in terms of its mechanic 6 or 7 or 10 or 20 or 50 times in other games, right? But suddenly you're doing it in a whole way that you've never seen before. It doesn't matter that its foundation is familiar. Its execution is different. And that's the unexpected, and that's the surprise, and that's the wow. So the puzzles have to organically exist in the world, because here's the thing. 98% of the time, they're not puzzles. You know, unless you do something like, The Basement took a great approach where they kind of gamified the story, where the Edward Tandy, the main villain, the cannibal, he put puzzles in to test your wit. Right. Okay, they can be more puzzle-like because you've justified it in the story in an organic way. But very few places actually do that, and it's just puzzle because escape room. Right. So, you want to make it so that the puzzles enhance the experience to the degree that it feels like you have a part in a live movie and that your actions actually matter. For a puzzle, best thing you can take away from design philosophy of a puzzle is the value is not the action. It's the epiphany. It's the solving, right? So it's that aha moment. You have a bunch of things that don't look like they connect, and you stare at them and you stare at them, and then you say, oh my gosh, I see it now. That's how you do it, right? That's the satisfaction. That's the adrenaline rush for the guest. It's not then spending 10 to 15 minutes to build it or to make it maneuver or work or something like that. It just becomes tedious, and you've killed the puzzle by doing it.
Right.
The other thing that is, I will die on this hill. I don't ever want to see something in a game that feels like it came straight out of a puzzle book, like a crossword puzzle or a word search or a connect the dots or any of those kind of things, right? I don't want to see that nonsense, because that stuff is something that you can get for $1.50 at the Walgreens checkout counter as an impulse buy that you did not plan to pick up when you went in there. It's not an escape game.
Do you try to make the first puzzle or two easier and kind of ramp them up into the puzzle game?
Typically. Back in the day, I used to think everybody wants something to be super challenging, and now I realize that's not true.
Right.
I like my puzzles to be challenging. I want there to be that but I try not to make things super hard anyways, just because I've done this long enough that I recognize that that's really not what people want.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about your newest game, The Zombie and the Witch Doctor.
So for me, the Zombie and the Witch Doctor, I wanted sort of a response to the Odd Pie game, or more specifically, a follow-up to the Odd Pie game, because the response to it, as the words I was looking for, was incredible. Even enthusiasts were over the moon with Odd Pie, just because it was so different and it was so fresh, and it was such a new approach to what an escape game could be. Again, it's a create your own adventure game. It's not really an escape game, but it was just something so different in an industry that had largely been playing it safe. So there was a certain degree of lightning in a bottle with Odd Pie, and I wanted a crack at capturing a little bit more of that. So I wanted something that had some of the flavor of Odd Pie, but was its own unique, distinct thing that was really not similar to Odd Pie in any way. I knew I wanted something else with a puppet. The character for the zombie game is Rufus. He's kind of Muppet style. He's 3 feet tall, right? If he were able to stand on his own feet, he'd be 3 feet from his feet to the top of his head. It's a giant puppet. Ventriloquist dummy style, where you stick your hand in the back, right? The other thing that I wanted from the Odd Pie comparison is the ability that this zombie game could potentially be replayable and expandable. So, and that is factored into it. There are these disembodied spirits that possess the body of the zombie, and the zombie starts becoming these other characters. And every one of these they're caricatures of characters, right? So they're like the wild stereotype of a type of character, cartoony, very silly, right? Very family friendly. But every one of them is sort of their own mini game, their own mini escape game that has a several puzzle track. And they can be played in any order. You can pick which ones you want to do, kind of like Odd Pie. You can know, well, I came this time and I played these characters, so I can do those characters next time. But it's also designed with the intention that those characters can be modular. So after you've gotten all of the equity that you want out of character number one, you can switch it out for a whole new character that comes with a whole new puzzle track. But the overarching mechanic of the game still flows exactly the same from point A to point B to point C. So it becomes infinitely expandable to be able to keep it fresh. It's silly and it's family friendly. He's a zombie. He eats brains by its nature. That's gory and that's violent and that's gross and there's blood and there's guts, except the brains are little stuffed animal Muppet style. They're cute brains and his limbs are cute and the zombie's cute. So there's nothing about him that's not appropriate for a kid. So the main character is named Rufus the Doofus because he lost his brain. That's what the other zombie kids call him. The zombie kids are mean. There is there's an alternate female version of the zombie. Her name is Dee Dee. She's named after my niece, Addison. We call her Dee Dee. And she has, ever since she was probably 2 years old, we've called her the Spooky Girl. She loves all the spooky stuff. Started with Haunted Mansion at Disneyland, Haunted Mansion Holiday, which is the Nightmare Before Christmas overlay that they do every fall and winter. She then watched Nightmare Before Christmas. She then learned about Beetlejuice. I think she was 3 and she learned about Beetlejuice. And I sat down with her to watch Beetlejuice. She didn't want to watch any of the movies. She only wanted to watch the scary parts with the monsters. And she's 3 years old. So naming a zombie after her was very thematically consistent, right? So for Christmas a couple of years ago, she would have been 4 years old, I think, 4 or 5, 4. I made her the Dee Dee puppet, the full 3-foot zombie puppet with the brain that comes out and all these different things. And the headline here to me is Addie is now 6, flash forward years later. Her little sister, Emmy, is 2. This 3-foot zombie puppet is in the playroom, the unsupervised playroom of 2 rambunctious, wild, energetic little girls. And that puppet is still, it's in as one of a piece as it was given to her, because obviously he's got all these detachable limbs and everything, but the puppet has held up. It's not torn. It's not, It's not gotten damaged 2 years later of little kids playing unsupervised with it. To me, it was never the intent. There was never like an ulterior motive of giving this to her as a gift. I gave it because she likes spooky stuff. But in hindsight, my gosh, there's no better market research than that. Right now, when a client says to me, how durable do you think they are? The immediate reaction is, well, a 4-year-old was playing with it and has kept it for 2 years and it hasn't torn.
Yeah.
You know, so there's nothing speaks more to the strength of how these things are made.
That's cool.
So anyways, Rufus is the witch doctor's apprentice. The story goes that every witch doctor hires a zombie as an apprentice because of that adage, you are what you eat. Zombies only eat brains, so that makes them really smart. They don't forget anything ever.
That's
Except
funny.
Rufus is not a very good zombie, and he lost his brain, literally, so he doesn't remember anything. The witch doctor's off on some sort of unnamed errand, and he gave Rufus this one thing he needs to do. Rufus, whatever you do, just don't forget this one thing that needs to be done before I come back. And of course, Rufus forgot because he doesn't have a brain. Now, the witch doctor kind of anticipated this. He likes Rufus. Rufus is a nice enough guy. He's fun. He's funny. So he keeps him around, even though he's not so good at being an apprentice. So to help him out and to help him keep his job, the witch doctor put in an ad in the local newspaper for professional helpers. That's where you guys come in. You're the helpers. And you're here to help Rufus do his job because he's clearly not equipped to do it on his own. So along the way, like I mentioned, you're going to encounter all these disembodied spirits. Each one of them has its own distinct flair, character, even voice, dialogue, accent, all of these different things that make these characters very distinctly unique from each other. None of them blend. Every one of them is going to have their own sort of fool's errands they're going to need you to do to help them. And then along the way, they'll give you little bits of the zombie back. Maybe one has his arm or his leg or whatever the case may be. And each piece that he gets back will help him sort of piece together where maybe he left his brain behind. When you put in his brain, of course, he's going to remember what that thing the witch doctor asked him to do. And it's probably too late, and we're probably in a whole lot of trouble. Witch doctors do tend to curse people after all. But at the end of the day, it's cute, it's family friendly, it's funny, the opposite of any zombie attraction you've ever seen. It's something that is appealing to adults, but you can absolutely bring a kid to without any hesitation.
Mhm.
There's puzzles in it for adults, there's puzzles in it for a younger audience. It's a balance by design to just be super family friendly across the board and just funny.
So you seem to have a lot of silly games. Do you kind of do all your escape rooms that way, or do you have other? I mean, I only know of the Big Mall Bertha's one.
So, you know, that's actually kind of a common misconception. I love my comedy games. I get massive value, personal value and satisfaction out of writing, developing, opening, operating a comedy game because the guest reaction speaks for itself, right?
Mhm.
But it is far from the only thing that I do. So Bertha, Odd Pie, the Paw game, to a degree, the zombie game. The zombie is a little bit more focused on story than just straight up comedy, but it's kind of a comedy story just the same. Sure, those are funny games. Those are silly games. I've got other game designs that are, you know, deeply psychological horror. One of my favorites called The Harvest. It is set in this abandoned barn, and it's this supernatural cult-like group of these scarecrow monsters that are basically trying to take over the town, brainwash them into joining them like a cult, and then reaping their bodies and sacrificing them for the greater good of this evil, nefarious, you know, world that they live in. So that one, there's nothing funny about that game at all. I mean, there's a little bit of comic relief here and there because you have to balance it. But it's from start to finish. It is chilling. It is unsettling. It's the kind of thing that it's uncomfortable. Then there's another one that I've got that's actually, it's rated R. I will not sell it to a client unless they openly market it as rated R because it is violent. It's gory. So it's called The Circus of Slaughter. And you know what they say, kids, you can't spell slaughter without death. That's the main villain, the clown. His name is Colonel the Clown because he's half popped. He's crazy. The thing with a good villain is they're able to justify their horrible action. And Colonel, there's nobody better at it than him because he's able to justify that all he wants is perfection. You know, he's got this philosophy that, you know, if he's walking down the street and he sees the perfect ear or nose or mouth full of pearly white teeth, should I not take it? He justifies to himself why he can literally cut things off of people and victimize them to make, in his mind, what will be the perfect clown, which will serve society. It's kind of like, if you really want to dumb it down, it's kind of the Joker meets Saw, right? So it's in a circus, but it's this horrific bloodbath of a thing. not a comedy game there. That's for sure.
Mhm.
I've got another one that is sold again. Who knows when it'll open? It is to a client that does move at their own pace, but it's much more of like an adventure based thriller. So I think it's going to be scary, but it's not horror. Thriller really is the best word. So yeah, I really love my opportunity to do funny and silly. It is my personality, but man, that is far from what I do. And some of my stuff is dark and uncomfortable. And you might need to sign a release that says you still have to be my friend after I pitch it to you, because it's really going to make you think twice about hanging out with me.
Now you probably don't have a lot of control over this because it would be more of the company doing this. Like, so when we did Big Ma's Bertha's, I was like, man, I asked them, like, do you guys sell a Claudette like stuffed animal? Like, I would totally buy a Claudette stuffed animal or something. Like, and when you were talking about the zombie, Kurt and I did a room in Florida that had a puppet that was part of it. And we both said, like, afterwards, like, do you guys have any merch? Like, I would totally buy a sticker of him or something like that. Do you have any say over that at places? Like, could you be like, hey, get some merch? Or...
Shout out to Melvin.
First of all, yes, I was just going to say, first of all, fun fact, there may or may not be, but definitely is, a photo of Rufus with his arm around Melvin sitting on a couch at the bureau.
Oh, that is awesome.
They are buddies. Rufus and Melvin, they go way back before Rufus was dead. They're friends. They're somewhere in the world they're canon together. I don't know what world that is. But there is actually a photo of them together. I love those guys at the bureau. They're great. They've been very supportive of what I do. So I don't control what a venue does in terms of if they want to merchandise. I do have the ability to work into the contract where you can license for merchandising use the characters from the games. It's the only instance where I would do a percentage of sales, because I don't do that for my game ticket sales itself. It's not something that I push because it's not something that a lot of venues even have merchandise, period.
Yeah.
But it is open to anybody that wants to do it. I will tell you that Novi, Escape Room Novi, the Odd Pie in Michigan, they do have in their contract a merchandising clause. They do have the ability to merchandise it. I have given them some suggestions on things that they could do. I'm always happy to interface with a partner client that way. I do all my own graphic design as well. So I could even, do t-shirt design for you if you really wanted me to, right? I've suggested some things in the way of a stuffed animal of Hubert the plant, using the odd and narrow coins to print the venue's logo on the backside and have it be like a keychain. There's a lot of options out there. I think that they're sort of focused on, let's run the game for now, and then we'll figure that out. But they were the ones who came to me and asked if they could merchandise it. So my gut and logic tells me that at some point they will merchandise it. The same goes for the Zombie and the Witch Doctor. That game doesn't officially have a home yet, so there isn't any sort of contract for merchandising on it yet. But everything is on the table, and I am someone who, if I played that game when I was traveling, just like you just said about Melvin and Puppet Heist at the Bureau, if I played this game, if it wasn't my game, I would buy that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So if someone wanted to add one of your games to their location, what's the process of doing that? And if you want to share the costs, you can, but how's that work?
So it's funny, on cost first, and then we'll get into the actual process. I used to be very, everybody is like, cost is a secret, right? Talk about cost. We're going to talk about Bruno, right? Well, what I found is that when I've only in the past month started promoting myself on Facebook groups for escape room design.
It's crazy.
I know, and shame on me, right? Absolute shame on me. I can say that it's about myself, but like, I'm a fool for not having done it all these years, right? But I posted the exact numbers. My numbers are high. I'm not cheap, right? I come with a lot of experience. I come with a lot of knowledge. It's cocky, but it's realistic, right?
Sure.
I posted all of those numbers up front, and I'm getting message after message after message. So I'm not afraid to share those numbers anymore. So short answer, if someone wants to add one of my games, the easiest thing to do, just reach out to me. Let's chat. Let's talk. I am a fan, Kurt can attest to this. While I would obviously love to do business with Kurt in the future when the time is right, I have no hard feelings if we don't, because I enjoyed our chat. Like-minded people, talking industry stuff, talking shop, the opportunity to do that, that's worth my time, even if it doesn't lead to a contract, and that's the genuine truth. So, reach out and talk. You can email me, chris@chris.plus. That's my email. It goes directly to me. I'm a one-man show, so you're going to get me. I'm going to respond, but let's chat. I love it when people reach out to me because I'm not a fan of sales. I'm the creative guy. I like creating. I like the imagination. I like the fun part. I don't like sales. I don't like pressuring people. I don't like cold calling and upselling and all of that.
You're
like
typical creative.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. To a fault, right? I mean, it's good and it's bad, but typical creative is the best way to sum it up. So I love when someone reaches out to me because it feels like I'm just getting to share something I'm proud of. It doesn't feel like a sale to me. With the majority of those games that are out there or on my website on Chris.plus, if you click to the projects section of the website, you'll see all different things I've done. You start clicking through those. The majority of them are all available. If they're not, they'll typically say specifically they're not. So the process, basically, if you're looking, say for example, Odd Pie, you decide I'd really like an Odd Pie for my venue. I'm in who knows where. I'm in Dallas, Texas. There's no Odd Pie near there. I want to open an Odd Pie in Dallas. Great. Check the radius. We're good. We can talk. So I'll send you over an acknowledgement of copyright form. You just sign it, basically saying I own the intellectual property. You can't copy it. That's it. Once that form is signed, we can do a Zoom call. We can go through every step of the game. I'll show everything to you. It'll all be in private. No pictures, no video, obviously goes without saying, but you will know every step of that experience before you even consider buying it. I want you to want it. I don't want anything sight unseen. I want you to know what you're going to get. So we would go through that whole thing. I also, like I mentioned, I'm a graphics guy. So all the design documents are super graphic design to make them a lot more fun than just sitting through a PowerPoint presentation or something.
Right.
I am someone who would never, under any circumstance, consider just selling a design document. There's a lot of people online and this is their business model and all the power to them. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just wrong for me. There's a lot of people online that they'll sell you a Word document and it gives you the steps of the puzzle. And then you go figure out how to build it and figure out what it looks like and figure out what the music is and figure out all these different things. I'm not that guy. I'm the guy that wants to see this project through from start to finish. So I'm going to be with you the whole way through and I'll give you, as many Zoom calls as you want if you're not local to give you direction and art direction and placement and all these different things. Whatever I can do to help, I'm available to you from the moment we sign a contract, basically end of sentence, because I don't stop being available when the game opens. I just finished something for Odd Pie in Michigan. That game opened almost a year ago.
Yeah.
It's to me, that's the integrity of having pride of your product and seeing it through. In terms of cost, there is a little bit of a variable before my number, and that is, well, how much are you going to do as the venue internally? Are you someone who's comfortable doing your own scenic? Can you do your own build out? Because scenic, by like a 0 at the end of the number, is a massive piece of an escape games budget, of an attractions budget, any attraction. If you're someone that can do the scenic yourself, that you're confident that you can execute it to a certain standard, and you've done it and you're experienced, you're going to do that yourself. It's going to save you a ton of money. The same goes for tech. If you're someone that can program your own tech puzzles for a game, do it yourself. It's going to save you a ton of money. Those are not things that I do personally. They are things that I have lots of assets that we can call into because I've been in the industry for so long, right? So I've got tech people we could call. I've got scenic people we could call, but your budget's going to go way out to call them, right, if you're able to do it yourself. Some people like to be hands off, right? Mm-hmm. My portion of the cost is a lot more straightforward. It essentially comes down to $15,000. It breaks up into two different portions. $10,000 is right up front. That's the design fee for the game. That essentially gets you complete rights to use the game in perpetuity, as long as you maintain it to the standard that it's designed to be maintained at, right? Which, if you're going to spend that kind of money, you're invested. You want it to be that standard. So it's not so much of a win. Right. So that 10,000 covers unlimited use of the game. There are no royalties. There's no licensing. There's no percentage of ticket sales or any of that nonsense. If a puzzle has any sort of digital asset that needs to be printed, now you're going to do the printing on your end, but all of that stuff is already designed to scale to be printed. I'll also give you a purchase list of links to get things if they're specific things that need to be ordered for a game. And then the remaining 5,000 is essentially for my time on site, typically for up to 10 days. That can be a little flexible. If you need an extra day and it's been a fun project, I'm not going to complain about an extra day, you know? But that is to do the final art direction, to do all the decor. You look at OddPie, every item that you see, every prop, I shopped and sourced every one of those. With the clients, we did it together, but I was the one that directed everything that we bought. I was the one that placed everything on the shelves to give it the look. I was the one that painted most of the signs. I was very hands-on, right? So that's all part of it. Obviously, the final install approval to say that the game is executing the intellectual property to the way it's intended. And then I'll manage the beta testing. I'll also train your staff, make sure that they know how to play with their new toy and that they're confident to do it when I leave, especially something like OddPie because it's so different. So that's the 10 and the 5. Separately for me, the only thing that comes separate is any sort of travel related costs, flight, car, gas, hotel. I only do it by receipt. So I'm not looking for per diem where it can really run up a number. I'm a cheap date. I'm a picky eater and I don't eat very much. So I do by receipt and that's where my numbers are. So at the end of the day, if you're somebody that can do all of that scenic in-house, you know, you're probably looking at, depending on the game, you know, maybe it's between $5,000 and $10,000 in props. You know, it's probably a lot less than 10,000, but just being conservative.
Cool. Before we close this out, thank you, Chris, for being here. And you have given us nuggets, like gold nuggets.
I've taken a ton of notes, actually. And I'm
Well,
not
that's
even
super
creating an
flattering.
escape
I
room.
appreciate that.
So,
Right. I want
Appreciate that.
to make sure that, and we're going to put all this in the show notes, how people can get a hold of you. Do you have any socials, that kind of thing?
Yeah. Email chris@chris.plus.
PLUS, right?
Yes.
Yep.
Chris@Chris.plus.
Yes.
The website is chris.plus.
Right.
It's so wild to me that I was able to get that URL. It is literally CHRIS.PLUS. That is my website. I do have a Facebook page for it. It's facebook.com/Chris+Creative, all one word. I will acknowledge, I don't keep it. I don't have the time to post on it as often as I would like to. I'd like to have regular content and I just don't have the time, but I do. One of the things that makes it fun to follow that page is when I'm on site for a game install, I will post a photo every day from the game install.
Oh,
so
cool.
You'll get that like fun behind the scene, behind the curtain look, teasing something new that's about to happen. So you will see those things on there. I posted all the puppets on there recently as they were getting finished. So those are essentially the ways, but email is the easiest.
Perfect. Mm-hmm. Well, Chris, it was awesome having you on the show. Thanks so much for being here. It was a lot of fun.
I appreciate you guys having me on. It's an opportunity to sit down with like-minded people and just share passion.
For sure.
So it's been fun for me. I enjoyed it. And, you know, I would do it again. I loved it. Thank you for having me on.
Right on. All right, Kal-El, anything from you?
Just even as just making small escape rooms for my camp. Yeah. Like, great ideas. So thank you. It was excellent. So.
I appreciate it. And listen, I've done tiny things for, I did a little one for a friend that was going away, that was moving out of town. You know, I mean, there's no such thing as too small, right? It's about creativity and it's about passion. And if you have the opportunity to share that passion, especially Chris, you have such an opportunity to share that passion with a younger audience. You know, you're essentially creating tomorrow's enthusiasts. And that's how the industry lives on and it grows, right?
Well said.
Awesome. Well, this is Kurt and Chris. Thanks for tuning in to Mystery Soup Podcast. Until next time, may your clues be clear and your escapes be triumphant. Keep puzzling, my friends.
See ya.
Mystery Soup. Mystery Soup. Mystery Soup.